Some will say that today we live in the golden age of air travel. Although there are numerous options of airlines and endless destinations, there was once a time when flying was part of the destination, a certain glamour and measure of luxury that today can only be revisited in old travel magazines and posters. The first scheduled commercial flight went down in history on January 1st, 1914. 25-year-old Tony Yanis flew the flying boat number 43, designed by Thomas Benoist, from St. Petersburg to Tampa Bay, with only one paying passenger on board. Abram Fell, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg, won the 23-minute flight in a bid for $400. Fast forwarding a few years, commercial air travel really stems from the development of airmail, which began in 1914 with a single bag of letters and postcards, and by 1925 over 14 million pieces of mail have been delivered. As the industry grew, the government created the Air Commerce Act of 1926, which allowed the creation of routes, development of navigation systems, licensing equipment, and investigation of accidents. Passengers aboard these first commercial flights endured some pretty poor conditions. The cabins were uninsulated and not pressurized. En route turbulence promoted some passengers to wear helmets and goggles. Many tried to combat the noise and lack of pressurization with chewing gum and by stuffing cotton in their ears. But there was no remedy for the smell of gasoline throughout the flight. Two companies that really brought commercial aviation into its prime days were the Boeing Company and the Douglas Aircraft Company, which were founded in 1916 and 1920. Both Donald Douglas and William Boeing competed against each other year after year for the biggest, fastest, and highest quality airplanes. Airlines such as Trans World Airlines, Pan Am, and Eastern Airlines revolutionized the comfort and service with the planes the Boeing Company and the Douglas Aircraft Company produced. What made air travel so luxurious and enjoyable in the 1930s to the 1960s was the quality of the service and the comfort aboard these massive airliners. Stewardesses served full-course meals on real china, and airline seats were large with ample legroom. As airplanes were built to be larger and faster, pilots could climb up to 32,000 feet, which led them to fly above the weather for smooth flight. Almost everyone flew first class in the 1930s to the 1940s, and it wasn't until the 1950s and 1960s that coach and economy class came about, but even then the class difference still allowed complimentary service and plenty of room. Coach seats had 3 to 6 inches more legroom than today, and economy class looked more like business class. First class was just as spacious as a modern hotel room. The interior of these planes were built with comfort and luxury in mind. Lounge areas where passengers could play cards, pad rooms for women, and bars aboard planes were offered. Stewardesses aboard the planes were often hand-picked. Young and beautiful was the common thread. The uniforms were part of the visual look of the airline. Everything in the cabin was imagined by designers, including the stewardesses. Many airlines mandated their hostesses to be 125 pounds or under, be unmarried, and always wearing high heels, along with having long legs. She was required to be friendly, smiling, and flirty at all times. Although the amount of glamour and quality of service is incomparable to today's air travel, the cost is almost just as insane. A TWA flight from Los Angeles to New York cost $168.40, which today equates to $1,225. This was 5% of the average salary at the time. The downfall of this era of high-quality air travel comes about when President Jimmy Carter signed the Airline Deregulation Act in 1978. The decrease in ticket fare meant that airlines had to cut out free meals and drinks and begin to focus more on quantity over quality in order to fill their planes. Eastern Airlines, TWA, and Pan Am all went bankrupt, as well as many other airlines from that day. The glamour of air travel quickly faded away as passengers began to be treated as cattle. The spacious seating, real full-course meals, beautiful hostesses, and general pleasure of flying has long been forgotten. Today, you're lucky to get peanuts and a plastic cup of soda. The stewardesses are now called flight attendants and are old and worn out, and passengers fly in sweatpants and flip-flops. Reflecting back on a time between the 1930s up to the 1970s, it is amazing to relive the glory days of air travel. But the safety of flying is nowhere near today's. In the 1950s to the 1960s, airlines experienced at least half a dozen crashes per year, and before these planes could fly above 30,000 feet, they were cruising at altitudes between 10,000 feet and 18,000 feet, with cases of turbulence so bad that they experienced sudden 500-foot drops, leaving passengers injured. Today's heightened security and experienced pilots ensures every flight to be a safe one. The glory days of commercial aviation are hard to imagine reliving today, as the person in front of you basically sits in your lap, but they are worth remembering as we look into the past of commercial aviation.